And we need to move on to another topic, because you've heard a lot about ULEZ and you might say, well, I'm not in London and therefore it doesn't affect me. Let me tell you, it does. And there's another big clean air zone that was planned in and around Manchester, including a huge area of Greater Manchester, which has been put on the pause. And it's quite interesting. I spoke a while ago to Nick Buckley, MBE, on this issue last year, and I'm delighted that we've got him back on the line. He is an independent mayoral candidate for the next mayoral election in Greater Manchester, next May, I think it is. Nick, a very good morning to you. Great to have you back on the show. So what's the latest update in Manchester with their planned clean air zone? We hear a lot about what's going on in London, and that there's nothing that can be done. It's obligatory because of air pollution, but something different has happened in Manchester. What's going on?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, basically the clean air zone in Greater Manchester is just a rebranding of the ULEZ. So that's the simple explanation. Our mayor, Andy Burnham, wanted to start this project a couple of years ago after the last mayor election. I campaigned the last mayor election. No one believed this was happening. So after the election, he tried to launch it and the people went mental. He lost his bottle and he said, oh, I'm going to suspend this and we're going to send it back to national government. That's been 2 years now and things have been very quiet since. It's still been suspended. I think, and the people think, we're just waiting for the next mayor election and then he's going to implement it.
And because there was actually a referendum many years ago, wasn't there, in Manchester about a charging scheme. What happened there?
So that was, I can't remember the year, about a decade ago that was. And the result was something like 79% didn't want a congestion charge for vehicles in Greater Manchester. So what did they do? What do all politicians do? They still want what they want. So they went away, they rebranded it, they brought it back with no public consultation. There was a little bit of a public consultation during COVID where they couldn't speak to anyone face to face. They spoke to less than 5,000 people at the consultation. No referendum this time, because our politicians are now beginning to get sick of referendums. The Brexit vote went the wrong way.
If there was a referendum, what do you think in and around Greater Manchester, what do you think the result would be on whether to have a clean air zone charging scheme?
It would be exactly the same as it was a decade ago. It'd be something like 80% saying no. That's exactly what it would. Now, if you look at the clean air zone and why it needs to be scrapped, well, if you base it on government figures, last year, the government released their testing air quality figures for Greater Manchester. So Greater Manchester made up of 10 councils. In 4 of the councils, they found the air was to an acceptable level. So there's 40% of the area that doesn't need a clean air zone. One of the councils was over by 1%. So there's 5 counties, that's 50% of the area that doesn't really need a clean air zone based on their figures. And all the other areas, the other 5 areas, only 1 or 2 bits in the area hit unclean air figures. According
to the arbitrary targets and deadlines.
Yes.
So is it true that Andy Burnham has actually spent tens of millions of pounds already on contracts and cameras across much of the area and signage? Has that already actually happened?
Yes. So the official figures, and of course, these are official figures and they don't tell you everything. So they announced some figures recently saying up to now, we've spent 18 million, only 18 million, by the way, only 18 million on cameras and things like that. What they haven't told us is the contracts they've had to sign, how much do they have to pay to get out of those contracts, the staffing costs that are already there. We've had 2 years now of cameras sat there doing nothing, the maintenance. So there's so many figures that's not in that 18 million. Now, we have a grassroots group in Greater Manchester called Rethink the Clean Air Zone Greater Manchester. Check them out on Facebook, 80,000 followers. And they've come up with some figures based on them looking at the detail of this. Up to last year, they reckon about 60 million has been spent up to last year.
60 million, according
to last year. Now they're now saying a ballpark figure for up to today will be about 100 million.
And that, of course, is taxpayers' cash.
My money, my council tax money.
It's everybody's council tax. And that would have just come from Greater Manchester council taxpayers, with possibly some contribution from the Treasury, from national government, do you think?
Oh, yeah. So national government has thrown some money at this as well. Because don't forget, it was their idea. It was the government who said, Greater Manchester, you need a clean air zone. Now, they didn't say you have to charge people. They just says, clean up your air, get your act together, clean up the air. It was our mayor who said, we'll clean up the air, but we're going to charge people to do it, though.
And somehow they seem to think that that's going to make a difference, when actually what we've seen with the data in London is that the ULEZ scheme has made about less than 3% difference to air quality in London since it was introduced. Utterly extraordinary. So,
we need to be honest, this has got nothing to do with clean air. This is a money-grabbing scheme so mayors in our big city have a funding pot they can spend on their pet projects.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly what's going on up and down the country. Even if you're not living in London, or if you're not living in Manchester, folks, I tell you, find out what's going on near you. I mean, Glasgow, there's a shockingly scheme that's been imposed in Glasgow that's having a devastating effect. And here's the point, isn't it, Nick? The impact on businesses, on tradespeople, is absolutely huge. Do you think, Nick, that essentially Andy Burnham has bottled this completely, or do you fear that if he gets re-elected, then he'll bring it in then?
I think he has to bring it in. I think he has to. Otherwise, the amount of money he's wasted will come out, and that's his career over. So he's either guaranteed his career is going to be over for incompetence, or he has to roll the dice. And if he rolls the dice with a Labour government in power, he can then go, they're forcing us to do this, not my... That's what he says now. Not my fault, the government are making me do this.
I hear what you're saying, Nick. I think actually that voters prefer a bit of honesty. And if he said, look, the first loss is the best loss, better to cut my losses now, actually events have moved on, things have changed, air quality has naturally improved or whatever, there'll be a way of spinning it. He's a master of propaganda and spin. Well, let's keep in touch, Nick, and we will update people as that evolves. That mayoral election is next year. Thank you to Nick Buckley, MBE. He is planning to stand as an independent candidate in that election. All over the country, you've got this madness, this absurdity.